This is Mujib from North Country Kettlebells. Today I'm going to be talking about kettlebell plank rows and some of the components that go into doing safe and effective kettlebell plank rows. The kettlebell plank row is a great exercise for practicing core engagement and full body coordination. We want to start with simple planks, just doing planks on the kettlebells, letting yourself get conditioned to having your hands on the bells. Maybe you haven't felt the kettlebells on the palms before with your weight on them. So just getting used to being in the plank position on the kettlebells. If you're using smaller kettlebells, cast iron style kettlebells, then just trying to get the center of balance for those kettlebells and making sure that you understand exactly how balanced you are. When you're first getting into the kettlebell plank row, you're really going to want to start with moving the kettlebell on one side at a time. So if I'm going to balance on my right side, I'm going to pull my left side 5 times, and then I'll balance on my left side and pull my right side 5 times. The main thing is that you're really just trying to gain the stability and the understanding of the control of that stability, and making sure that your palms get conditioned to not just being in that one arm plank, but to adding that extra kettlebell weight to the pull. So after we've worked on empty hand rows, after we've worked on alternating that empty hand row, then we're gonna work on the weighted row, where I'm gonna balance on one kettlebell and pull the other kettlebell a number of times, and then switch and pull the other kettlebell a number of times. Once you feel comfortable with that though, you can start to get into the alternating kettlebell plank row, where I'm just gonna alternate arms each repetition. So when I'm talking about doing alternating kettlebell plank rows, one of the main things is the stabilization on one side while I'm pulling on the other side before each pull. So if I'm going to be switching from my right side to my left side, once I pull on my right side and put that kettlebell back down, I'm going to want to make sure that I'm fully stable before I pull on the left side. This isn't the sort of thing that we're going to try to rush through, because I don't want to lose my balance as I'm pulling and have that kettlebell tip over. So when doing those alternating rows, just making sure to stabilize on one side before pulling, and then when that one goes back down, make sure you're very stable before you pull on the other side. As far as the landmarks of my kettlebell plank row goes, I want to think that I'm going to pull the kettlebell to my hip, almost as if I'm trying to pull the ball of the kettlebell to the crest of my hip, keeping my elbow very close to my body. I don't necessarily want to kick off my elbow far away from my body as I'm trying to pull to my shoulder. I want to keep my elbow close, keep my shoulder packed down, and actually pull to my hip, or the crest of my hip. That is just a good simple landmark. It's not a very big range of motion. I basically want to imagine that the whole time that I'm doing these kettlebell plank rows, I'm trying to stay on line the entire time. With pulling to the hips, it sometimes becomes tempting to let the body twist as we pull. So as you're doing that alternating plank row, you want to think that your hips are going to try to stay as flat as possible the whole time. I'm not going to try to lean into that side that I'm stabilizing on, pulling that hip up on the opposite side higher towards the ceiling. I want to try to imagine that there's a board across my lower back, and my hips are going to try to stay as flat as possible as I'm pulling that kettlebell to the hip, replacing it, and then switching sides to the opposite side. With the single arm stabilization, like if I'm just pulling on the kettlebell on one side at a time, sometimes it's a little easier to keep the hips flat than with the alternating. Sometimes the alternating makes folks want to twist a lot. The main thing is that you want to think you're engaging your core, you're stabilizing your entire body, and then you're really just pulling with that pulling arm. There's going to be a little bit of shift of weight because you're obviously going to be putting all of your weight onto one hand. But as far as the hips twisting to allow that pull to happen, we always want to try to keep those hips as flat as possible during that alternating row and even during that single-sided row. So to recap, those components of our kettlebell plank rows are going to be first just starting with a basic plank, letting your hands get used to being in that plank position on those kettlebells, and then letting my hands come up one at a time, and then mimicking the landmarks for that row, bringing my hand up to my hip, maybe tapping myself on the crest of the hip. Next, I want to start with one side at a time, right? So stabilizing on the left side, pulling the right side 5 times, then stabilizing on the right side, pulling the left side 5 times. From there, I want to go into alternating plank rows, where I'm going from the right side to the left side, alternating each rep. I want to make sure that I'm stabilizing as I'm doing that alternating row to stay as safe as possible, and to make sure that I'm nice and balanced and stable as I'm going from one side to the other. I want the landmark for that kettlebell plank row to be the ball of the kettlebell coming to the crest of my hip with my elbow very close to the body. And I want to make sure that my hips are staying as flat as possible with no twisting of the hips as I'm pulling and very minimal weight shift from one side to the other on the alternating plank row. Try out anywhere from 1 to 5 reps and anywhere from 3 to 5 rounds. Again, we always want to think about keeping everything under control, making sure that at the beginning of my set I have a level of control, and at the end of my set I still am maintaining that level of control of the movement. And as always, we're always going to try to keep our training safe and effective and feel as comfortable and as confident as possible. This is Mujib from North Country Kettlebells talking about the Kettlebell Plank Row.